The elevator doors would not open. Elena Marchetti pressed the button a second time, then a third, her heartbeat picking up speed as the numbers above the door stayed frozen on 12. She was already late for the most important interview of her life, and the old building on Harrow Street seemed determined to swallow her whole. When the doors finally slid apart, a tall man in a gray coat stepped out first, glanced at her for exactly 1 second longer than a stranger should, and walked away without a word. Elena told herself it meant nothing. She stepped inside anyway, and the doors closed like a held breath. The office of Lang Maritime Logistics occupied the entire top floor, all polished stone and glass, with a view of the harbor that made the whole city look like a postcard. Elena smoothed her blazer, checked her reflection in the window, and reminded herself why she was here. 6 months of rejection letters, a mountain of student loans that grew heavier every month, a studio apartment with a landlord who called twice a week about rent. She needed this job the way a drowning person needs air, and she was not going to let a stuck elevator or a strange man in a gray coat shake her nerve. A receptionist with sharp eyes and a sharper haircut led her down a corridor lined with black and white photographs of cargo ships. At the end of the hall, a set of double doors opened into an office larger than Elena's entire apartment. Behind the desk sat a man who did not look up right away. When he finally did, Elena forgot for a moment how to breathe. He was not what she expected. She had pictured someone older, softer, the kind of executive who spent his days shuffling papers and taking long lunches. Instead, she found a man perhaps in his late 30s, dark hair combed back, a jaw that looked carved rather than grown, and eyes the color of wet slate. He wore a suit that fit him too well to be off the rack, and he watched her the way a collector watches a rare object he has been waiting a long time to find. "Miss Marchetti," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him, "please sit." His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried a weight that made her obey without thinking. She sat. "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Rossi," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I know the position is for an executive assistant, but I saw the listing also mentioned bookkeeping and client coordination. I have experience in both, and I've read your resume," he interrupted, not unkindly. "Business degree, top of your class. 2 internships, both ended early because the companies folded. Not your fault. Bad luck follows good people sometimes." He leaned back in his chair, studying her the way a man studies a hand of cards he has already decided to play. "Tell me something that isn't on the paper." The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" "Anyone can list a degree. I want to know why I should trust you in this office, around information that matters, dealing with clients who expect discretion." He tapped one finger against the desk, slow and deliberate. "Are you someone who keeps secrets, Miss Marchetti?" It was an odd question for a shipping company interview, and something in the back of Elena's mind flickered with unease, a small warning light she chose to ignore because she needed this job too badly to listen to it. "I keep my word," she said instead. "If you tell me something is confidential, it stays that way. I don't gossip, I don't cut corners, and I work harder than anyone you'll interview this week." For the first time, Dominic Rossi smiled, and it changed his whole face, softened the sharp lines into something almost warm. "I believe you," he said. "You're hired." Elena blinked. "Just like that, don't you want to check references or—" "I already have." He said it simply, without apology, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to have investigated a candidate before she ever walked through the door. 80,000 a year, full benefits, and a signing bonus if you can start Monday. Is that acceptable? The number was nearly double what she had asked for in her cover letter. For a moment, relief flooded through her so completely that she almost missed the strange stillness in the room, the way the receptionist outside the door had gone quiet, the way the man in the gray coat from the elevator now stood just visible through the frosted glass, waiting. She pushed the thought away. This was simply how successful men did business, she told herself. Fast, decisive, generous. "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course. Thank you, Mr. Rossi. Dominic, he corrected. You'll be working closely with me. We should not be so formal. She left the building that afternoon feeling as though she had won a small lottery, practically floating down Harrow Street with her phone already out, calling her sister Claire to share the news. 80,000, Claire's voice crackled with static and disbelief. For an assistant job, Alina, that's insane. What kind of shipping company pays that much? A good one, apparently, Alina laughed, though even as she said it, the question settled uncomfortably in her chest. Maybe my luck is finally turning. Just be careful, Claire said, and there was something in her tone, some older sister instinct that had never once been wrong. Anything that looks too good this fast usually has a catch. Alina brushed it off then. She had no way of knowing, on that ordinary afternoon with the harbor wind in her hair and the whole city humming around her, that her sister's warning was the truest thing anyone would say to her for a very long time. Monday morning came fast. Alina arrived 20 minutes early, wearing her best blazer, a notebook tucked under her arm, ready to prove that hiring her had been the right decision. The receptionist, whose name turned out to be Sophie, showed her to a desk just outside Dominic's office, a desk with a computer already set up, a coffee already waiting, and a small vase of white flowers that Alina assumed was simply a nice corporate touch. He does that for everyone, Sophie said, following her gaze. New employees. He likes people to feel welcome. She paused, glancing toward the closed office door, and something crossed her face too quickly for Alina to name it. Just remember, whatever you see or hear in this office stays in this office. Mr. Rossi values discretion above almost everything. I understand, Alina said. Confidentiality is standard in most companies. Sophie gave her a look that Alina would only understand much later, a look that said this was not most companies, and then she smiled and walked away. The first weeks passed in a blur of learning. Alina organized files, scheduled meetings, answered calls from clients whose businesses had names like Halloway Freight and Voss Import Group, companies she had never heard of despite years of studying the shipping industry in school. She managed Dominic's calendar with military precision, and in turn, he treated her with a courtesy she had not expected from a man who ran an empire from behind a mahogany desk. He remembered how she took her coffee. He asked about her weekend, and seemed to actually listen to the answer. He never raised his voice, not once, not even when a shipment was delayed or a client called to complain. But there were things Alina noticed, small things she filed away without quite admitting she was filing them. The way certain visitors arrived after normal business hours and left without ever appearing on any calendar she managed. The way Dominic sometimes stepped into a side room to take calls and came back with his jaw set tight, his eyes distant, before smoothing his expression back into calm within seconds. The way the man in the gray coat from her very first day, whose name she learned was Marcus, seemed to always be somewhere nearby, watching entrances, watching her, though he never said more than a few words at a time. She told herself these were simply the habits of a private man running a private business. She told herself the unease she sometimes felt was just nerves, the natural discomfort of being new somewhere important. She was good at telling herself things. One evening in her third week, Alina stayed late to finish a report. The office emptied out around her until it was just her desk lamp and the hum of the building's heating system. She heard Dominic's office door open, and he stepped out, tie loosened, sleeves rolled to his forearms, looking more tired than she had ever seen him. "You're still here," he said, sounding surprised, though something in his voice suggested he was pleased. "Almost done," Alina said, gesturing at her screen. "I wanted to get the Halloway numbers finished before tomorrow." He walked over and stood beside her desk, close enough that she caught the faint scent of cedar and something sharper beneath it, like the air after a storm. He looked at her screen, at the careful columns of numbers she had built, and nodded slowly. "You're good at this," he said. "Better than good. Most people who sit at that desk last a month before the work overwhelms them. You've been here 3 weeks and you already understand the rhythm of this place better than employees who have been here for years. I like the work, she said honestly. It's the first job that's ever felt like it fit. Something shifted in his expression then, something Alina could not name, a kind of quiet satisfaction, the look of a man watching a plan unfold exactly as he had hoped it would. Good, he said softly. I'm glad it fits. He told her to go home, that the numbers could wait until morning, and as she gathered her things, he walked her to the elevator himself, an unusual courtesy from a man whose time, she had learned, was worth more per hour than most people made in a week. The elevator doors opened smoothly this time, no delay, no stalling, and as she stepped inside, he held the door for 1 extra second. Alina, he said, and it was the first time he had used her first name without the polite miss before it. Be careful going home tonight. The harbor district isn't always safe after dark. It was such an ordinary warning, the kind any employer might give any employee, and yet something in the way he said it, low and certain, like a man who knew exactly what dangers existed out there because he had built some of them himself, made her skin prickle. She thanked him, and the doors closed, and she rode down 12 floors alone with her own reflection in the brushed steel walls, trying to convince herself that the strange tightness in her chest was nothing more than tiredness after a long day. She did not yet know that she had already stepped into something far larger than a job, that the $80,000 salary and the flowers on her desk and the careful courtesy of a powerful man were not gifts, but the opening moves of a game she had not been told she was playing. She did not yet know that the company on the 12th floor of Harrow Street was, beneath its polished glass and careful paperwork, the working office of one of the most powerful men in the Rossi family, a name whispered in certain circles with the kind of respect usually reserved for judges or generals, though the reasons for that respect were built on foundations no textbook had ever taught her to recognize. All she knew, walking out into the cool evening air with her sister's warning still echoing somewhere in the back of her mind, was that something about Dominic Rossi made her feel both entirely safe and entirely unsettled at once, two feelings that should never have been able to exist together, and yet somehow did. She would understand everything soon enough, and by then, understanding would no longer be enough to save her. The following weeks brought a rhythm Alina grew to trust, mornings of coffee and calendars, afternoons of client calls and careful paperwork, evenings when the office thinned out, and it was sometimes just the two of them, Dominic reviewing contracts with the same intensity most people reserved for matters of life and death. She began to admire him in ways she had not expected, the sharpness of his mind, the way he could recall a client's entire shipping history without glancing at a file, the strange gentleness he showed her even as everyone else in the building treated him with something closer to fear than respect. It was Sophie who first planted a seed of doubt Alina could not shake. They were in the break room one afternoon, waiting for the coffee machine, when Sophie asked quietly, almost carelessly, whether Alina had ever wondered why a shipping company needed quite so much security. There are cameras in places that don't make sense, Sophie said, stirring sugar into her cup without looking up. Guards who don't wear uniforms, meetings that never appear on any schedule I've ever typed up. I used to ask questions when I first started here too. And what happened? Alina asked. Sophie's spoon stopped moving. I stopped asking, she said, and then the coffee machine beeped, and she carried her cup away without another word, leaving Alina alone with a silence that felt heavier than it should have. That night, walking home along the harbor, Alina found herself replaying the conversation over and over, turning it like a stone in her palm, searching for a smooth explanation and finding none. She thought of the man in the gray coat who always seemed to be nearby. She thought of the late-night visitors who left no trace on any calendar. She thought of Dominic's warning about the harbor district, delivered with a certainty that no ordinary executive should have possessed. Piece by piece, question by question. The comfortable story she had told herself about her lucky new job began to develop cracks, small at first, the kind that could still be papered over with reassurance and routine, but cracks nonetheless. She did not know yet how wide those cracks would grow, or how quickly, or that the answers waiting on the other side of them would change the entire shape of her life. She only knew that for the first time since walking into that glass office on Harrow Street, the ground beneath her felt less solid than it had before, and that some quiet, careful part of her had already begun preparing for whatever truth was coming. The folder was not supposed to be on her desk. Alina noticed it the moment she sat down that morning, a plain manila folder resting beside her keyboard where she had left nothing the night before. She assumed at first that Sophie had left it, some new client file waiting for her attention, but when she opened it, the papers inside made no sense for a shipping company at all. Columns of numbers with no invoice attached. Names she recognized from late-night visitor lists, now paired with figures far larger than any cargo shipment could explain. A handwritten note in the corner of one page, initials she did not recognize, dates that stretched back years. She closed the folder quickly, her heart pounding, and looked up to find Marcus standing at the far end of the corridor, watching her with an expression she could not read. He did not move toward her. He did not speak. He simply watched until she looked away, and when she looked back a moment later, he was gone. Alina spent the rest of the morning trying to focus on her actual work, answering calls, confirming schedules, but her mind kept circling back to the folder now locked in her desk drawer. She told herself there had to be an explanation. Perhaps it belonged to someone else and had been placed on the wrong desk by mistake. Perhaps it was some kind of internal audit document she simply did not have the context to understand. She was good, she reminded herself, at finding explanations. She had been finding them for weeks. At noon, Dominic asked her to join him for lunch, something he had never done before. They walked to a small restaurant 2 blocks from the office, a place with quiet corners and a maitre d' who greeted Dominic by name and led them to a table set apart from the rest of the room without needing to be asked. Alina ordered something she barely tasted, her attention split between the conversation and the folder still sitting heavy in her mind. "You seem distracted today," Dominic said, watching her over the rim of his glass. "Long morning," she said, forcing a smile. "Client calls." He studied her for a long moment, the kind of look that felt as though it could see straight through carefully chosen words to whatever sat beneath them. "Alina," he said finally, setting down his glass, "I think it's time we had an honest conversation." Her stomach tightened. "About what?" "About what you found on your desk this morning." The restaurant noise seemed to fade around her, the clink of silverware and low murmur of other conversations dropping away until it was just his voice, steady and quiet, filling the space between them. "I don't know what you mean," she said, though the tremor in her own voice betrayed her. "Yes, you do." He did not sound angry. If anything, his tone carried something closer to relief, as though he had been waiting a long time to stop pretending. "I put it there myself. I wanted you to see it before someone else showed it to you in a way that would frighten you far more." Alina set down her fork, her hand suddenly unsteady. "What is it? What am I looking at?" Dominic leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked less like a powerful executive and more like a man choosing his next words with great care, aware that whatever he said next could not be unsaid. "Lang Maritime Logistics is a real company," he said. "It ships real cargo, employs real people, pays real taxes, but it is also something else. A cover, if you want the simplest word for it, for business that does not appear on any public ledger. My family has run parts of this city for 3 generations. I'm not simply an executive, Alina. I am a capo in an organization most people only know from films and rumors, and everything in that folder belongs to a world I did not think you were ready to see quite this soon." The words landed like something physical, pressing the air from her lungs. Alina stared at him, searching his face for some sign that this was an elaborate joke, some test of her composure that she could laugh off once he revealed the punchline. But his expression stayed level, patient, entirely sincere. "You're telling me I work for organized crime," she said slowly, the words feeling foreign in her own mouth. "I'm telling you that you work for me," he said, "and that the shipping company is only half of what I do. I should have told you sooner. I chose not to because I wanted to know you first, to see the kind of person you were before I decided whether you deserved to know the rest." "Deserved," Elena repeated, and something sharp rose in her chest, cutting through the shock. "You don't get to decide what I deserve to know about my own job. You hired me under false pretenses." "I hired you because you were exactly what I was looking for," Dominic said, his voice steady even as hers rose. "Smart, careful, loyal once loyalty is earned. I have watched a great many people walk through that office in the last 10 years, Elena, and very few of them had what you have." "And what is that supposed to mean?" Her voice cracked slightly despite her effort to keep it level. "That I'm some kind of prize you've been evaluating. Do you understand how insane this sounds?" "I understand precisely how it sounds," he said. "Which is why I am telling you now calmly, in a public place, rather than letting you discover it in a way that would put you at risk. Elena, the folder on your desk is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to be honest with you, finally, about the world you have already been standing inside for the last month without knowing it." Elena's mind raced, trying to fit this new information into everything she had witnessed over the past weeks. The unmarked visitors, the security that made no sense for cargo logistics, Sophie's careful silence in the break room, Marcus watching entrances like a soldier rather than a receptionist's assistant. Piece by piece, the picture assembled itself with a clarity that made her feel sick, because none of it was truly surprising anymore. Some part of her, she realized with growing horror, had already suspected long before this lunch, and had simply chosen comfort over the truth because comfort was easier to live with. "I need to leave," she said, pushing back her chair. "I need to go home and think." "Of course," Dominic said, standing as well, though he made no move to stop her, no gesture that suggested she was not free to walk out of the restaurant and never return. "Take the afternoon. Take tomorrow if you need it. I will not call and I will not send anyone to your apartment. You have my word." Elena walked home that afternoon in a daze, the city around her looking different somehow, sharper, as though a filter she had not known existed had been lifted from her eyes. She thought of every late payment she had brushed off as normal business, every hushed phone call she had overheard and dismissed, every flower on her desk that she had mistaken for simple kindness. By the time she reached her apartment, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely turn her key in the lock. She called Claire that evening, though she could not bring herself to tell her sister the full truth. She said only that something at work had unsettled her, that she was considering whether the job was really right for her after all. Claire, sharp as always, pressed for details Elena could not give, and eventually let the subject drop with a warning that echoed the one she had given weeks before, a warning Elena now understood she should have taken far more seriously. "You can always walk away," Claire said. "No job is worth losing yourself over." Elena wanted to believe that was true. She wanted, more than anything, to believe that walking away was still a simple thing, a matter of typing a resignation letter and returning her badge and disappearing back into the ordinary life she had been living before Harrow Street. But even as she lay awake that night staring at her ceiling, some instinct she could not quite name whispered that the decision might not be entirely hers to make anymore, that she had learned too much, seen too much, and that men like Dominic Rossi did not simply let people walk away once they had been shown the truth. She told herself she was being dramatic. She told herself, once again, a story that made the fear easier to carry. But sleep did not come easily that night, and somewhere beneath the exhaustion, a small, persistent voice kept reminding her that the folder on her desk had not been an accident, and that everything Dominic Rossi did was, in some way, a calculated choice. The next morning, Alina did not go into the office. She sat at her kitchen table with a legal pad, listing every reason to quit on one side and every reason the job still mattered on the other, and found, to her own frustration, that the second list kept growing longer despite everything she now knew. The salary. The way Dominic had never once raised his voice at her, even now, even after everything. The strange, undeniable pull she felt toward a man she should have been running from as fast as her legs would carry her. By late afternoon, a small package arrived at her door, delivered by a courier who left before she could ask any questions. Inside was a single white flower, the same kind that had sat on her desk since her first day, and a short note written in careful, deliberate handwriting. "Take whatever time you need," it read. "The offer to walk away is real, so is the hope that you won't." Alina sat with the note for a long time, turning it over in her hands, feeling the pull of two futures tugging at her from opposite directions. One was safe, ordinary, the life she had imagined for herself before any of this began. The other was uncertain, dangerous, and lit with something she was only beginning to admit she wanted despite every warning bell in her mind. She did not yet know which path she would choose. She only knew that the choice, whatever it turned out to be, would not be an easy one, and that the folder now sitting in her desk drawer had changed the shape of her life permanently, whether she returned to Harrow Street or not. The suitcase was already zipped when the knock came. Alina had spent 3 days turning the decision over in her mind, and by the fourth morning she had made her choice. She would not go back to Harrow Street. She would not become part of a world built on things she could not bring herself to name. She packed a single suitcase, bought a bus ticket to the coastal town where Claire lived, and told herself that starting over somewhere new was not running away. It was simply choosing the life she had always meant to have before a folder full of numbers had tried to convince her otherwise. She opened her apartment door expecting a delivery or perhaps a neighbor, and found Dominic standing in the hallway instead, alone, no driver waiting behind him, no sign of the careful entourage that usually surrounded him at the office. He looked at the suitcase by her feet before he looked at her face, and something in his expression shifted, though his voice stayed as calm as it always did. "You're leaving," he said. "It was not a question." "I have a ticket for the 11 o'clock bus," Alina said, standing straighter than she felt. "I appreciate everything, Dominic, truly, but this isn't the life I want. I can't be part of what you do." "May I come in?" he said, "just for a moment. I would rather explain some things to you here than have this conversation in a hallway where anyone might hear." Every instinct told her to say no, to close the door and walk to the bus station and never look back. But some quieter part of her, the part that had spent 3 sleepless nights rereading his note about the flower, made her step aside instead. He entered, glanced briefly around her small apartment, and stood near the window rather than sitting, as though he understood this was not a conversation to have comfortably. "I want you to understand something," he said. "This is not a threat. I need you to hear that clearly before I say anything else. But it would be dishonest of me to let you walk onto that bus believing that leaving is as simple as buying a ticket." Alina's chest tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means that in the world I live in, information matters more than almost anything else," Dominic said. "You have spent a month inside my offices. You have seen documents, met associates, overheard conversations that most people outside my organization never come close to. To my family, to the people who answer to me and to those I answer to, that makes you a person of interest, whether you ever intended it or not. If you disappear to your sister's town tomorrow, there are people who will want to know why, and whether you took anything with you besides memories." "I haven't told anyone anything," Alina said, her voice rising despite her effort to stay calm. "I would never, "I believe you," he said, and he said it so simply, so without hesitation, that it startled her more than if he had shouted. "I believe you completely. But belief is not the same as safety, Alina, and I cannot protect you from 3 states away. I can protect you here close, where I can control who knows what and who does not. That is not something I can promise you if you leave." The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing closer, though nothing in it had physically changed. Alina thought of Claire's warning, of the small, persistent voice that had told her, that very first night, that walking away might not be as simple as it sounded. She had wanted so badly to be wrong. "So what are you saying?" she asked quietly. "That I'm trapped? That there's no version of my life now that doesn't include you and everything you're part of?" Dominic was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped lower, rougher around the edges in a way she had never heard from him before, something almost like vulnerability breaking through the careful control he wore like armor. "I am saying that I did not plan for this to happen the way it has," he said. "I hired you because you were talented, and yes, because there was something about you I wanted near me, something I have not felt in a very long time. I did not plan to care whether you stayed or left. But I do care, more than I have any right to, and that complicates things for both of us." Alina stared at him, searching for the calculated executive she had met in that glass office, and finding instead a man who looked, for the first time, genuinely uncertain of how his words would land. "That's not an answer," she said. "That's a feeling. I asked if I'm trapped." "You are safer with me than without me," he said. "That is the truest answer I can give you. Whether that means you are trapped depends entirely on what you decide to do with the safety I am offering." Silence stretched between them, heavy and complicated, filled with everything neither of them said aloud. Alina looked at the suitcase by the door, at the bus ticket tucked into her coat pocket, and felt the 2 futures she had been weighing all week collapse suddenly into something far more tangled than a simple choice between staying and leaving. "If I stay," she said slowly, testing each word before she spoke it, "what does that actually look like? I'm not going to become someone who launders money or threatens people or does whatever it is you and your associates do behind closed doors. I won't be part of that." "I would never ask you to be," Dominic said, and something like relief passed briefly across his face, quickly smoothed away. "You would continue exactly as you have been, managing schedules, handling legitimate business, the work you were actually hired to do. The other side of my life would stay separate from yours as much as I can possibly make it. I am not a man without boundaries, Alina, whatever you might believe about people like me. And if I want to leave later," she pressed, 6 months from now, a year from now, if I decide this still isn't the life I want, will you let me go then?" He met her eyes directly, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw something that looked almost like pain flicker behind the calm gray of his gaze. "I want to tell you yes," he said. "I want to promise you that whenever you decide this is too much, I will simply step aside and let you walk into whatever life you choose. But I would be lying to you, and I have decided, standing in this room right now, that I do not want to lie to you ever again." "Then what's the truth?" Alina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic crossed the small distance between them, close enough now that she could see the exhaustion behind his composed exterior, the toll that honesty seemed to be taking on a man who had likely spent his entire adult life keeping people at a careful distance. "The truth," he said quietly, "is that I have never in my life wanted to keep something as much as I want to keep you near me. I know how that sounds. I know it is not fair to say to a woman standing beside a packed suitcase. But love me or hate me, Alina, for whatever that word means coming from a man like me, you are not someone I know how to simply let go." The words hung in the air between them, and Alina felt something inside her chest crack open, not with fear this time, but with a confusion so total she could not immediately name what she was feeling. Anger, certainly, at being told in one breath that leaving was dangerous, and in the next that she was wanted so deeply he could not release her. Fear, at what it meant to be tied to a man whose world operated by rules she barely understood. But beneath both of those, quiet and unwelcome, something that felt uncomfortably close to being seen, truly seen, by someone for the first time in longer than she cared to admit. "I need time," she finally said. "I'm not getting on that bus today, but I'm also not agreeing to anything yet. I need to think, without you standing in my apartment telling me what my life is supposed to look like." Dominic nodded slowly, stepping back toward the door with the same careful control he had walked in with, though something in his posture seemed lighter, as though her decision not to leave, even without a promise attached to it, had given him something he badly needed. "Take whatever time you require," he said. "I will not contact you until you contact me first. That is my word, and I do not break it." He left, and Alina stood alone in her apartment for a long time, the suitcase still packed by the door, the bus ticket still folded in her coat pocket, though she already knew, somewhere beneath the fear and the confusion, that she would not be using it. She sat down at her kitchen table and stared at the wall, replaying his words, "Love me or hate me. You are not someone I know how to simply let go," until they had worn a groove into her mind that she suspected would never quite smooth over again. Outside her window, the city moved on as it always did, buses running their routes, people walking to jobs that had nothing to do with hidden folders or whispered warnings. Alina watched it all with the strange, disorienting sense that she was no longer entirely part of that ordinary world, that some door had closed behind her the moment she opened her apartment to a man in a hallway, and that whatever came next, there would be no simple way back through it. The phone on Alina's desk rang 3 times before she noticed her hand was shaking too badly to answer it. 4 months had passed since the afternoon Dominic stood in her apartment, and in that time, Alina had built a strange, careful kind of peace with the life she had chosen. She returned to Harrow Street the day after his visit, said nothing about suitcases or bus tickets, and simply resumed her work as though the conversation had never happened, though both of them understood that everything between them had shifted permanently. She had grown skilled at the balance he promised her, handling contracts and schedules and legitimate business by day, while learning, slowly and without ever being asked, to recognize the boundaries she was never meant to cross. She had become, in ways she still found strange to admit, someone the entire office depended on, trusted even by men like Marcus, who no longer watched her with suspicion but with something closer to quiet respect. But the phone call that morning was not routine. Sophie's voice on the other end was tight with fear, none of her usual composed politeness present at all. "Get Dominic," Sophie said. "Now, tell him it's about the Voss shipment. Tell him Victor Sinclair's people were seen near the North Warehouse this morning." Alina's stomach dropped. She had heard the name Victor Sinclair only a handful of times, always spoken in low voices, always followed by a tension that settled over the office like a held breath. Sinclair ran a rival organization on the other side of the harbor, and though Alina had never been told the full history between his family and the Rosses, she understood enough by now to know that his name meant danger in a way few other things did. She found Dominic in his office within seconds, and the moment she relayed Sophie's message, his entire posture changed, the careful calm she had come to know replaced by something sharper, more alert, a man suddenly recalculating every plan he had made for the day. He picked up his phone and made 3 calls in rapid succession, his voice low and clipped, giving instructions Alina only partly understood, before finally setting the phone down and looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. "I need you to listen to me carefully," he said. "There has been tension building between my family and Sinclair's for months, tension I did not want to bring anywhere near you. It seems that tension has reached a point where he is trying to send a message, and unfortunately, the message he has chosen involves people close to me. That includes you." "Me?" Alina's voice came out thinner than she intended. Why would I have anything to do with this? Because you work at my side, Dominic said. Because anyone watching this office for the last 4 months has seen how much you matter to me, and men like Sinclair understand exactly where to strike when they want to hurt someone without touching them directly. He crossed the room and gripped her shoulders gently, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. I need you to trust me completely for the next several days. No arguments, no questions I cannot answer yet. Can you do that? Alina nodded, though fear had settled cold and heavy in her chest, a fear unlike anything she had felt in the 4 months since choosing to stay. What do you need me to do? For now, nothing except stay close to Marcus whenever you leave this building, Dominic said. He will drive you home tonight, and he will be outside your apartment until I tell him otherwise. I know that feels invasive. I promise you it is necessary. The following days unfolded with a tension Alina had never experienced, the office humming with an undercurrent of urgency, even as everyone continued their ordinary tasks with careful, deliberate calm. Marcus, usually a man of few words, became almost a constant shadow, walking her to her car each evening, checking the street before allowing her to step outside. Dominic grew more distant during the day, locked in meetings with men Alina did not recognize, his voice through the closed office door sometimes rising in ways she had never heard before, sharp and commanding, before dropping again into the practiced calm he wore for her benefit whenever she entered the room. On the 5th night, everything came to a head. Alina had stayed late finishing paperwork, the office nearly empty except for Dominic behind his closed door and Marcus stationed near the elevator. She was gathering her things when she heard raised voices from the lobby downstairs, distant but unmistakable, and moments later, the sound of the elevator moving, rising toward their floor despite the late hour. Marcus appeared in the doorway of her office almost instantly, his usual calm replaced by something urgent. "Stay here," he said. "Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me or Dominic." Alina's heart pounded as she watched him disappear down the corridor, and for the first time since taking this job, she felt the full, undeniable reality of the world she had chosen to remain part of. No longer an abstract danger discussed in careful whispers, but something moving through the building toward her at that very moment. She locked the door as instructed and pressed herself against the wall beside it, straining to hear anything through the thick wood, her breath coming fast and shallow. Voices rose in the corridor outside, unfamiliar ones mixed with Marcus's low, steady tone, and then Dominic's voice joined them, commanding and cold in a way that sent a shiver through her despite the fear already coursing through her body. She could not make out words clearly, only the shape of the exchange, tense and controlled, a negotiation happening in real time just beyond the door she stood behind. Minutes passed that felt like hours. Then, gradually, the voices quieted, footsteps retreated, and the elevator hummed again, descending. Alina stood frozen against the wall until a soft knock came at her door, followed by Dominic's voice, low and careful. "It's me," he said. "You're safe, open the door." She did, and found him standing there disheveled in a way she had never seen, his jacket gone, his collar loosened, a small cut above one eyebrow that he pressed a handkerchief against without seeming to notice it. Behind him, Marcus stood watching the corridor with the alert stillness of a man still fully expecting trouble. "What happened?" Alina whispered, though some part of her already understood she might not get the full answer. "Sinclair sent men to send a message," Dominic said. "The message has been received and dealt with. You are safe. That is all that matters tonight." "That is not all that matters," Alina said, her voice shaking now, fear giving way to something closer to raw honesty. "You're hurt. This happened because of me being here, because of what I mean to you. I need to know what I'm actually part of, Dominic. I can't keep living inside careful half-explanations." He looked at her for a long moment, weighing something behind his tired eyes, and then slowly, He reached out and brushed a strand of hair back from her face, a gesture so gentle it seemed impossible coming from the same man who had just walked away from whatever confrontation had taken place in that corridor. "You are right," he said quietly. "You deserve more honesty than I have given you. Not tonight when everything is still raw and dangerous, but soon. I promise you that." Alina searched his face, exhausted and afraid, and despite everything, unable to deny the pull she felt toward him in that moment, a pull that had only grown stronger with every week she stayed at his side rather than boarding that bus months earlier. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words costing her something to say aloud. "Not just of Sinclair, of how much I've let myself feel for you, knowing everything I know now." "I am scared too," Dominic said, and the admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her, a man unused to naming his own fear aloud. "I have spent my entire life building walls around the parts of myself I could not afford to let anyone see. You have found your way past nearly all of them, and I do not know how to keep you safe and keep you close at the same time. I am trying. I promise you I am trying." They stood together in the quiet office, the danger of the evening still humming in the air around them, and Alina realized with a clarity that both frightened and steadied her that whatever came next, she was no longer simply a woman who had stumbled into a dangerous world by accident. She had chosen to stay, chosen it again and again over the past months, and standing here now, watching this powerful, guarded man reveal a fear he clearly rarely allowed himself to feel, she understood that her choice was no longer about the salary or the flowers on her desk, or even the safety he had once promised her. It was about him, fully and completely, in a way that terrified her more than Victor Sinclair ever could. Marcus cleared his throat quietly from the doorway. "We should move you both to somewhere more secure tonight," he said. "This isn't over yet." Dominic nodded, still watching Alina's face. "Will you come with me?" he asked, and though the words were simple, she understood the deeper question layered beneath them, a question about far more than where she would spend the night. "Yes," she said, and meant it more completely than she had meant almost anything in her life. "I'm staying." Sirens echoed somewhere across the harbor as Alina pressed herself into the corner of the car, watching the city blur past the window, while Marcus drove faster than she had ever seen him drive before. The safe house, as Dominic called it, sat on a quiet street 20 minutes outside the city, an unremarkable brick building that gave no hint of the security hidden inside its walls, reinforced doors, cameras covering every angle, a small team of men who nodded to Dominic with the same alert respect Marcus always showed. Alina barely had time to take in her surroundings before Dominic pulled her aside into a small study lined with books and closed the door behind them. "Sinclair will not stop after tonight," he said, pacing in a way that betrayed a restlessness she had never seen in him before. "What happened at the office was a warning shot, nothing more. He wants my attention, and now that he understands you mean something to me, I am afraid he will look for ways to use that." Alina sat down heavily in the chair by the window, exhaustion and fear finally catching up to her all at once. "Then tell me what I'm supposed to do," she said. "I can't just sit here waiting to become a bargaining chip in a war I don't fully understand." Dominic stopped pacing and knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his gray eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her chest ache. "You are not a bargaining chip," he said firmly. "You are the reason I intend to end this conflict permanently, rather than allow it to drag on the way my father allowed conflicts to drag on for decades. I have spent years trying to keep my family's business quiet, controlled, away from the kind of open conflict that gets people hurt. Sinclair has forced my hand, and I will not let it touch you." Over the following 2 days, Alina watched a side of Dominic she had never witnessed before, a man moving pieces across an invisible board with total focus, meeting with associates late into the night, making calls in low, urgent tones she was no longer shut out of entirely. He explained, in careful pieces, the history between his family and Sinclair's, a rivalry stretching back to his father's generation, old grievances over territory and loyalty that had simmered for years before finally boiling over now. He did not glorify any of it. If anything, Alina sensed a deep exhaustion in him, a man who had inherited a war he never fully wanted, doing his best to end it as cleanly as such things could ever be ended. On the third night, word came that Sinclair had agreed to a meeting, brokered carefully through associates both sides trusted, a chance to negotiate an end to the growing conflict before it spiraled further out of control. Dominic insisted Alina stay behind at the safe house, and for the first time since she had known him, she did not argue, understanding that some battles were not hers to stand beside him in. Not yet, not while so much remained uncertain. The hours he was gone stretched unbearably long. Alina sat by the window watching the quiet street, replaying every moment of the past 5 months, the interview that had changed her entire life, the folder on her desk, the note about the flower, the confession in her apartment doorway. She thought of Claire, who still did not know the full truth of where her sister had disappeared to, and felt a pang of guilt so sharp it nearly took her breath away. She would need to find a way to explain all of this eventually, though she had no idea yet what words could possibly make any of it sound reasonable to someone living an ordinary life. When Dominic finally returned near midnight, his face carried a weariness Alina had never seen, but also something else, a cautious kind of relief that eased the tightness in her chest the moment she saw it. "It's done," he said, sinking into the chair across from her. "Sinclair and I reached an agreement, territory lines redrawn, an understanding between us that neither side pursues the other's people going forward. It cost more than I would have liked, but it is over, Alina. You are safe." Relief flooded through her so completely that she found herself crossing the room without thinking, wrapping her arms around him before either of them could decide whether the gesture was appropriate. He held her back just as tightly, his exhaustion finally showing through the careful composure he had maintained for days, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, simply standing together in the quiet study while the danger that had shadowed them for nearly a week finally began to lift. "I need to ask you something," Dominic said eventually, pulling back just enough to look at her face. "And I need you to answer honestly, without worrying about what you think I want to hear." Alina nodded, bracing herself. "These past months, I have asked you to stay because I told you it was safer, because I convinced myself that keeping you close was about protection," he said. "But standing here now, with the danger finally behind us, I find I no longer want to hide behind that reason. I want to know if you are staying because you believe you have no other choice, or because some part of you wants this life, wants me, despite every reasonable argument against it." The question hung in the air, and Alina realized, searching her own heart with an honesty she had been avoiding for months, that the answer had become clear to her somewhere in the middle of the fear and the danger and the strange, undeniable tenderness she had witnessed in this complicated man over the past week. "In the beginning, I stayed because I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of what leaving might cost me, afraid of a world I didn't understand yet. But somewhere along the way, that changed. I'm not staying because I feel trapped anymore, Dominic. I'm staying because when I picture walking away from you, from this office, from everything we've built together in this strange, difficult world, I don't feel relief. I feel loss." Something in his face broke open then, the careful control he wore like a second skin finally giving way to raw, unguarded emotion. "I told you once that love me or hate me, you were never leaving me," he said quietly. "I meant it as a warning then, a truth about a world I did not think you would ever choose willingly. I did not expect that somewhere in these 5 months it would become something else entirely, a hope rather than a threat." "It has become that for me too," Alina said softly. In the weeks that followed, life slowly found a new equilibrium. The tension with Sinclair's organization settled into an uneasy but lasting peace, and Alina returned to her desk on the 12th floor of Harrow Street with a clarity she had not possessed when she first walked through those doors. She was no longer the uncertain graduate desperate for any job that would pay her bills, nor entirely the frightened woman who had once packed a suitcase in a moment of panic. She had become something else, someone who understood exactly what she had chosen and why, someone who had looked directly at the danger and the darkness woven through the life she now shared with Dominic Rossi, and had chosen with open eyes to stay. She still thought sometimes of the ordinary life she might have lived, the ordinary desk job in an ordinary company, free of hidden folders and midnight negotiations and men who watched entrances with careful, practiced eyes. She suspected she always would, some quiet part of her forever aware of the road not taken. But when she looked across the office each morning and found Dominic already watching her with that same quiet intensity from their very first meeting, she felt no regret, only a strange, settled certainty that she had ended up exactly where she was always meant to be, in a life far more complicated and far more real than the one she had once imagined for herself. "Love me or hate me," he had told her, standing in her apartment doorway all those months ago. She understood now, finally and completely, that she had chosen neither one alone, but both together, wrapped inseparably around each other the way danger and devotion so often are, and that she would not, in the end, have chosen any differently even if she had somehow known from the very beginning exactly where that first interview would lead her.